In the midst of coronavirus and the resulting pandemic, two movies with loosely similar subject matters resurfaced and gained new relevance in this era. I have seen much written about Contagion, but comparably less on Outbreak, a 1995 blockbuster which skyrocketed into the Netflix top 10 in March of 2020. Under its newfound relevance, I decided it was worth a revisit all these years later. In other words, I rewatched Outbreak so that you don't have to. Here's what I discovered. The film begins with an aptly relevant quote from one Dr. Joshua Lederberg, immediately reminiscent of Bill Gates' TED Talk, which wasn't taken with the seriousness it should have been in hindsight. In order for this movie concept to be believable, it delivers a sense of gravitas to set the scenario. It does so by incorporating enough science and military to feel credible. Take, for example, this introduction to the protagonists and their line of work. In a particularly effective oneer, which runs for 3 uninterrupted minutes in the original film, we are seamlessly guided through the halls of the US AMRID base, progressively raising the stakes. With each iteration comes higher military credentials and tighter health and safety security. You can catch one hidden cut in the style of Alfred Hitchcock's Rope right here. It's a clever play on the rule of threes that there are 4 levels of biosafety, with our characters, of course, in level 4. Purely through film language and the time it takes to get to this biosafety level, we know that this is serious stuff. Character development comes simultaneously with laying the groundwork for the movie's fictional virus, Motaba. Let's take a quick moment and acknowledge that this movie has the most allegations-heavy cast of Oscar-winning actors ever.
Son of a bitch, he did that on purpose.
The first act of the movie traces the virus from African jungles to the United States. It begins with the illegal wildlife trade and a single host carrier, a monkey, who infects anyone it comes into direct contact with. The monkey travels by boat, is sold illegally, briefly ends up at a pet store, and then is set free in Northern California. This does bear some resemblance to coronavirus, given the wildlife origins and seeing danger travel globally one step at a time. However, the film builds in a notable detail about Motaba as it makes its journey.
Motaba is only spread through direct human contact. Now, you said that yourself, Sam.
I know what I told you, but now I'm telling you we're facing a new strain.
What?
It spreads like the flu.
Only once it reaches the primary setting does it mutate and then become exponentially more contagious. How they show this discovery is something so 90s Hollywood, and I absolutely love it.
It's airborne.
The film builds extensive framework so that when the virus becomes airborne and unleashes at full scale, it is all within the town of Cedar Creek, an Americana town which never misses an opportunity to show us its church steeple. In true disaster movie form, the virus wreaks havoc on the townspeople, and they must be saved. Nearly immediately after, all outside threats are vanquished. Jimbo and his girlfriend die in Boston before they can infect anyone else.
It's a beautiful day to save lives.
Motaba is effectively contained.
No further infection at Boston Municipal. We're in the clear.
This is the biggest difference between the movie's virus and coronavirus. Outbreak's scope of infections quickly becomes limited to a small town, within which it's extremely deadly. For clarity of terms, coronavirus is the term for the virus itself, and COVID-19 is the disease which humans contract from having corona. I am not a medical professional, so please seek professional sources for further information. Motaba's disease is better designed for Hollywood storytelling than COVID-19. The scope is much smaller, but the stakes are much more immediate and therefore higher. The visual symptoms of COVID-19 are not as shocking as Motaba, but it's truly global, which at the time probably seemed too unrealistic for pre-coronavirus audiences. Yet when coronavirus hit, and society quickly learned the importance of avoiding transfer, one of the first visuals that came to my mind was this moment I remembered from all the years before. For me, it gave cinematic language to the danger at hand. There has been much said about the parallels between coronavirus and the movie Contagion. Contagion really does globalize the stakes, whereas Outbreak easily contains them. Outbreak's drama is about curing it. The spread is limited to a single whiteboard. When we are shown what could happen if the virus escapes, it's comically rudimentary compared to what we've now lived through.
48 hours.
The film also had no way of realizing how long the virus would continue to spread, in many parts due to a lack of leadership in the US. As a movie from a pre-scandal Clinton era, there are some interesting gender politics that represent the push-pull of this time. Protagonists Sam and Robbie are a nearly divorced couple, dedicated to their jobs first, relationships second. When we meet Robbie, she has just taken up a prestigious job at the CDC and is moving out for good. It's harder to imagine for us now, but at this point in the cultural consciousness, Bill and Hillary Clinton were often looked at as a tag team, as astutely described by Lindsay Ellis. In Robbie, we have a character who at first feels like a progressive leading lady. She is not Sam's distant wife or girlfriend regulated to the sidelines. For much of the film, she is equally taking charge. However, when the stakes need to be raised to personal stakes heading for the climax, it is Robbie who is accidentally infected, giving Sam all the more fuel to find a solution within mere hours. Robbie is incapacitated for the rest of the movie, despite her previous heroism. Personal thoughts aside, this feels quite representative of this era. Outbreak wants to have a female character be professional and heroic, but when push comes to shove, it's still going to be the man, or the men, who swoop in and save the day. Back to comparisons. Another obvious difference is problems that are introduced are also given clear solutions. If the monkey is found, it can provide antibodies and save the town. Crisis solved. In Sam, we have a hero who has the capability to save the day. Hard to imagine this logic can apply outside of a movie. Even the villains of the film have a clear solution, which also would feel too simple a way to eradicate this pandemic. Movies are designed with keeping the timeline as short as possible. Yet, what we're seeing with coronavirus is far outlasting earlier predictions, and will not have a clear end in sight for quite some time. This is what's challenging about comparing movies to today. The challenges we face feel too murky, too complex, too grand, even for Hollywood structures. We see this all the time in movies about race that want to show clear solutions. At many moments, pandemic steps become set pieces, which often resemble the real thing, such as people trying to escape quarantine, which, if I'd watched in March, would have looked ridiculous. But then...
There's around 300 protesters, some of them armed.
Because we are fighting for freedom.
There is also one crazy moment of unexpected parallel in the opening scene, which takes place in the Congo, or, as one soldier describes it,
"Get me out of this shithole."
Oh, Jesus, you're killing me.
A component that is captured quite well is denial politics. In a great scene early on, General Billy Ford refuses to send out any warning because they had twice previously sent out false alarms. The combination of incompetence and nefarious humans helps the virus spread. Professionals are shown wholly unprepared for the virus. This unpreparedness rings especially true. Perhaps it's the most relevant piece of the entire movie. It's worth reminding that in May of 2018, our current president disbanded the Directorate of Global Health Security and Biodefense. In a pre-corona world, the warnings of Bill Gates and intelligent scientists were not taken to action until the virus was impossible to contain. This is nonpartisan. Even with credible threat, experts are ignored. I fear a similar outcome for a bigger issue of our time, a topic for another day. When Outbreak reaches its climax, it gives Sam not only the ticking clock of the virus killing his wife, but also the military's plan to wipe out the entire town with Operation Clean Sweep. What ensues is a whole lot of helicopter action. Ultimately, The military pilots are persuaded to intentionally sabotage the evil operation by dropping the bomb into the Pacific. This ending was actually created due to a poor audience test response at a more morbid outcome. And this ending is a little too neat. The Pacific Ocean was the site of hundreds of atomic tests throughout the 20th century, which created devastating radiation damage all across the ocean, insidious in its own right. These tests most often affect native Polynesians, and at times, indigenous people were looked at as a necessary sacrifice for national security. One more example of embedded racism in American history. This is well documented in the book Pacific, which I highly recommend. So, if they ever make an Outbreak sequel, it will look a little more like Chernobyl. One of the best scenes of the movie is when McClintock and Ford discuss Motaba in terms of historical context. The 1918 pandemic was only a generation prior to these men. The lowest death toll estimate for that pandemic is 17 million. McClintock rationalizes their bomb drop plan by comparing the virus to warfare. Early on, in an effort to rally Americans, politicians often used war analogies with coronavirus. In both the film and in real life, these are attempts to simplify the narrative, to make it something we can beat and win. Of course, it isn't that simple. Coronavirus does not follow a cinematic structure. The early sense of expecting a back to normal is long gone. Outbreak depicts a town of 2,600 becoming infected. In the US alone, we've had more deaths than all of Outbreak every week since March. We're well beyond the scope of this film. As we continue living with this heavy danger, I concede there is some entertainment to be had in watching and comparing Outbreak, much in the way of other movies that gain unexpected topicality. The parallels described are intriguing and arguably help clarify the actual situation. Beyond that, it's fair to say that coronavirus and the cascading events that will continue to follow are larger and more amorphous than Outbreak and Hollywood's imagination could have possibly predicted.